Man. Quinn, all right, here you go. Like, I usually say like a fist away, but do whatever you want. Yeah. Just so you know, I do swap these little balls out periodically.
Okay, that's fine.
Just in case. I don't know. Even if there wasn't a pandemic, I would swap them out. I buy like a big package of them at a time. Pop filters. Yeah. Well, hey, so yeah, right before we started podcast. So you're Quinn Foster, correct?
Quinn Foster, yeah.
With Ozarks Hate Watch.
Hate Watch, yes.
What would you even use to describe yourself? An activist?
You know, it's kind of a contentious word nowadays.
I know. I was trying to think like, I had actually somebody who was on actually turned out to be a lobbyist, and I was kind of like seeing their work they was doing around the issues that, like, you know, poverty, child poverty, and different things that she was working on. But that's what led her into lobbying, actually, which I don't know how I feel about lobbying, but I like activism.
Yeah, I mean, I think activism is going to be your first step before you actually get into something. I didn't expect to be doing this for as long as I did, but I kept up with it, and now I'm that activist, I'm that hate watcher that everybody either knows and either loves or hates. So I don't know what I am. I just do what I feel is right, to be honest.
Yeah, that's and what's crazy is, like, me too. Right. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because never have some of the things that you talk about and some of the things I talk about in, like, my history classroom been so unpopular. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, I know that I've just shot you some feelers about, like, things that I deal with here locally. Like, if you drive across the bridge in Dardanelle, you're going to see the Stars and Bars Confederate flag flying as soon as you cross. And I'm like, what does that say to you when you go over there? It says to me, because I'm educated, I'm like, whoa, that's terrible. But, like, that's, I feel that way just because of my education. So I can't imagine somebody that it's connected to the other end of what people say on heritage. Like, when, it's like, well, my great grandpa was super affected by the people that flew that flag. And then to know that, like, okay, well, maybe your grandpa was around when they added the 4th star to the Arkansas flag. I'm just like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, monuments going up throughout the civil rights movement, flags flying everywhere. I was sitting at my gym and noticed a church voluntarily flying the Arkansas flag. And I was like, I wonder if they know about the 4th star.
No, I think most people don't know about it. Whenever I drive anywhere and I see that Confederate flag, and it just kind of tells me, like, these people aren't trustworthy. That's the first thing that goes to my mind. Okay, regardless of whatever happens, probably don't need to trust these people like anything significant. When I see a lot of it in a town, I think, okay, this city just wants to send a message. Hey, black folks, we don't want you here. We don't like you. We like our heritage. And, there's the whole argument, is it heritage, not hate, or is it just hate being disguised as heritage? And really, it's hard. There are some folks I know for a fact, the Confederate flag is not a symbol of hate to them. But on the backside of that, I have my life experiences, and anybody and everybody's ever said anything racially aggravating, generally they were around that flag or presenting that flag, or they were flying that flag for some god-awful reason.
Yeah, that is, and I can't remember because you're like, you're raising awareness on some of the same issues with a lot of people I'm friends with. My friend Thurman we've been doing a series of, like, we watch these Civil War movies and we're like, bullshit, right? But he gets fired up about this stuff. He's the one who brought the fact that Stars and Bars was actually fine to my attention, right? And I was like, no, because I knew about the monument, but all of those, symbols of the Confederacy, like, when I found out that those came about, not after Civil War, like, okay, it's 1870, and
Robert E. Lee said, forget about it. When the war was over and they were asking him, about, I think it was 10, 20 years later, they were like, forget about it. It was a mistake. Don't raise your children to follow this nonsense. It was ridiculous what we did. So, then to see that it came back during, the early 1910s and 20s, and then it also came back during the Civil Rights Movement. It's like, the symbols are associated so heavily throughout history with that hate.
Well, see, and what I talk with people about too is, you take, like, the most commonly seen Confederate flag, I feel like, is Robert E. Lee's flag, right? The battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia.
God help us.
Yeah, right. But it's like that is a part of that campaign. And like one thing I've just gone down the rabbit hole on a little bit, I knew about the UDC, right? The United Daughters of the Confederacy, and they're behind a lot of the monuments. But there's this other group I found out about, and there's a chapter here locally in Dardanelle called the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. And they are responsible for their fair amount of Confederate symbolism, upkeep, perpetuation of the lost cause myth and stuff like that.
Yep.
And what's disturbing to me is like, I was talking with my cousin the other day, and I was like, hey, did you know you were taught the lost cause myth? Like, I mean, dude, the school in your hometown is called the West Side Rebels. Like, I mean, there's in Johnson County, they're just up the road, like if you head towards Fort Smith down 40. Clarksville, if you hang a left on 64, you'll go to this town called Hartman. And they used to be a sundown town. They were a sundown, I mean, Bottoms town. But after Reconstruction, Jim Crow era, the sundown town. And like, that's where a lot of my family came from. And then in the 80s, they school consolidation. And they're like, we need a new mascot. We were the Hartman Hawks. We're going to be the West Side Rebels. And I'm just like, but my aunt, she is the youngest of all of my aunts and uncles. And she was in 8th grade when that happened. And she was being taught the lost cause myth. And that was in 80s. That stopped being perpetuated as much in the 90s, right? Like,
I disagree.
In history textbooks.
In history textbooks, I would agree there. Cause,
that's in my world. That's what I'm filtering through. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I actually graduated from technically Russellville High School in 2014.
Really? Dude, you're from here?
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that.
Bro.
Yeah.
All right, I'm from Clarksville. I'm like trying to explain to you where Clarksville is because I'm like, I see you as a regional person.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was actually my time in Russellville which actually led me to go on and create a Ozarks Hate Watch. But I remember when I was in there and it came to the issues of Civil War, the teachers would just, they would just be like, just close the textbooks. And then they started explaining the whole lost cause narrative and what have you. And whenever they actually go back into the books, they start talking about battles. They'd just be like, well, that isn't right. They'd say that, just like that isn't right. That isn't accurate. That isn't true. And of course, you had the kids in there who would always scream the lost cause narrative. They would always be like, it wasn't about slavery. It wasn't about this. It wasn't about that. And teachers would be just nodding and agreeing with them. And I'm just looking at them like, okay, why is it in the Declaration of Succession for 14 different states?
Oh yeah, and like over 80 mentions. Then there's the famous Cornerstone speech by Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy, where he says the Confederacy is founded on the cornerstone of white supremacy. That's a verbatim quote to my knowledge, right? If I might be paraphrasing a word or two, but that guy went back to Georgia, or his home state, I believe it was Georgia, and became a senator as soon as the Civil War was over. What the fuck? Right? Like that sort of stuff. Whereas like in Arkansas, we disbarred Confederates from voting for a while after. And then once Reconstruction ended, they were back in there. And that led to a lot of horrible things happening for our state. And I teach about it. Because a lot of people are like, I don't know on high schools. I made the decision to get a master's degree and teach at college for some of the reasons that you were talking about. It's like, well, I don't want to write my lesson plan on the board. I don't want to have to tell my students to close the book. I just want to be real with them, But I think that like people are always like, well, the history books. I'm like, not in my class, right? Because particularly in Arkansas history, man. But in U.S. History 1, we finished the whole semester with the Civil War. And man, it's every time I go through it. You ever see that? Got a nail here. Sorry. You ever see that Ken Burns documentary, The Civil War?
Not yet.
I don't want to tell you to save your time because it has some good components to it, but this is like the documentary textbook on the Civil War, right? Like, it's good, but it has this one historian in it. And maybe they did it to be balanced. I don't know. But he perpetuates some of that lost cause mythology. We're going to do a podcast about it. It's this big, long series. It's going to be the end cap on our Civil War through cinema series. But, man, this... I think the problem is all of these people, like from my parents' generation and even my aunt, who is like 15 years younger than my dad, they were taught this. So it's so in the consciousness, like just maybe even, what year did you graduate?
2014.
Yeah. Just maybe even with your generation and a couple before, have we just started to
remove the elements of lost cause from the Civil War narrative?
Yeah.
But even then, it's still, this is Arkansas. Most of what folks are taught here, it goes from family to family, generation to generation. It's not actually what it ever is taught in school. Most people, that's not what they actually are listening to. People, they just go through high school just to get out of it. You're going to remember what your pa told you long before you remember, like the Pythagorean theorem in 9th grade. Who even remembers that? So that's also another thing that's kind of working against sort of getting rid of that narrative. Mm-hmm. The people who you love and trust the most, you're not going to believe that they're going to tell you the wrong thing, or they're going to tell you something historically inaccurate or something untrue. That's with any human being.
Yeah, man. Like I've had many conversations along these same lines. Like I was like on my way here, I was like having this conversation again. But there's a lot of value here in the educational purpose of what we'll put out after the podcast. But I almost get frustrated sometimes because it's like, okay, well, I'm doing as much as I can do, podcasting, teaching in my classroom, and I talk with people all the time about these issues, systemic racism, like
they are difficult,
breaking cycles. Somebody asked, they're like, well, what's the most important thing in your life? I was like, breaking cycles. Whether that's a traumatic cycles, emotional, whatever it is, like I don't want to be like some of the groups that we're talking about, man. And in Clarksville,
oh yeah,
it was, well, yeah. I mean,
it's so bad up there.
It is, and
we're
you go to the
people. And
have you been to the Peach Festival before?
No.
Okay, I haven't been in a while, right? But it's like the Atkins has the Pickle Fest, and I've never been to that, right?
I have. It was really fun.
Okay, so yeah, so now but when I was a kid, I went, right? I bought all of this like 8 years old. Like I don't even know about the history of the Civil War at all. And there's like on the courthouse square, they're selling all this Confederate like Robert E. Lee flag stuff, right? And it's like we allow that to go on, and then I'm like, what is that? Cool, it's an X flag. It looks great. I'm 8 years old. Like, let me get this sword over here too, But it's like that is one thing. Like what I've been seeing the awareness you've been raising on Dixie Outfitters. Right.
Yeah, well, it's that's part of the white supremacist trend that's called normalization, or it's getting elements of white supremacy normalized into mainstream American culture. And we actually just talked about this last night. There's apparently a new slur out there that's called joggers that prominent white supremacists are now using on social media in lieu of saying the N-word in its full glory. So when you were 8, they were basically setting up a fun festival that you were going to remember. It's going to be a happy memory, happy experience. The candy, the drinks, the food, the animals, everything, and then the flag. And it looks innocent. It looks innocuous. And of course, just like you, just like me, it looks cool. It looks awesome. Rebels, yeah, the whole Southern attitude. But, then we all grew up and realized, didn't really actually mean that.
Man, and like I kind of felt weird telling you about it, honestly. Like, I've just been super frank with people. Like, yeah, I bought Confederate shit when I was 8 years old with my allowance, and I feel terrible about it because I didn't know any better. And now looking back on it, I'm like, what the fuck why did we allow this to come into my court square?
It's like I tell a lot of people, change is inevitable, but letting it happen so that it benefits yourself and benefits your neighbors and your community, that's the best kind of change ever. I have someone, on my team right now with me. He was a hardcore white supremacist in the 90s. Now he's a family man with a multiracial family, and he is one of our foremost gun trainers in our organization. And he explains to everybody, he's like, listen, I was one of those people. You need to listen to what I'm saying. Don't try to reason with folks like this. You have to kind of exclude them from your day-to-day life and society to keep yourself safe. Mm-hmm. So, people, they do change. And I think that's the thing. In the South, we can still change.
Yeah. I wonder if, like, this is a joke, but like your friend that you mentioned, he's in a multiracial family. Is he a Caucasian man?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I wonder if he just, like, always had, like, a fetish for women of color.
So me and him actually talked about that.
Right? Like, that's the first thing I thought when he said that.
I mean, we did talk about that. He said it was more of how he was raised. It was more of what he was told when he was in his upbringing, what have you. And it was whenever he got away from Arkansas. That's, he said he went to
yes,
he went to
world
go join the
travel.
military somewhere, and when he joined the military and got out, he realized, oh my God, I don't believe any of this. It was because he was here in Arkansas, because he was in that small town, and because that culture reinforced those normal, the normalization of the Confederate ideas or white supremacist ideas. That was why he was behaving the way he was. He always tells everybody, if you feel that way, you need to just get out of Arkansas for a little bit and go see the world and actually understand it.
Have a conversation with somebody that is not lining up with your beliefs. I don't say not like you, because here's the thing: we're all human beings. Like we can find. I bet you and I could find a ton of commonalities, and we never even have met before now. Just like I'm watching your Facebook, but nobody wants to do that.
No. It's hard too. Another big problem is people like to piss on Southerners. I will say that.
Oh, damn it. You're totally correct.
They do like to piss on Southerners. For example, if I say the word Arkansas when I'm in St. Louis, they say, oh, you're sleeping with your sisters. And I'm like, no, Arkansas are cousins, Mississippi's sisters.
That's true.
But
wonder where's that put Georgia and Alabama?
Mama sisters.
Oh man, George Wallace, Jesus Christ.
But
yeah,
I think that's also another thing is people don't have a lot of respect for the South of the United States. People still carry over those awful stereotypes. So yeah, when you're growing up in a small town and you want to feel significant or important, you look to your ancestry a lot of times, and your ancestors, the idea that they were rebels, they weren't taking all the BS that everybody else is taking nowadays, and they were willing to step up for their rights. That sounds great. Anybody would fall for that sort of propaganda. But just that's not the truth.
One of these movies we just watched, there were literally no people of color in it at all. There was one person. No, it was this is a Civil War movie. Oh. This was Gettysburg. One person of color.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's way to omit them, because here's the thing with Gettysburg is the Confederacy, Lee's division and others were capturing runaway slaves and slaves in the area and sending them back south, all in and around that invasion to Maryland, right? So it's that's something that just gets glossed over a lot, but it's no, they were catching people to and from that invasion and shipping them behind the southern lines, and then these are freed people or runaways. Both is what I was reading about, but these are either freed people in the north or runaways or people along the border. Right. But it's way to exclude that from the story. Well, you hit on everything else. Why didn't you put that in there?
It's something I always talk about, especially with pop culture and media. America is afraid to face its racist past.
Oh, but
they do not want to. Thomas Jefferson, I think it was third or fourth grade growing up, and they're talking about how Thomas Jefferson's extended family, and they're still living descendants today. And then, of course, you see the black people, and, of course, some kid asked the question, well, how are there black people in Thomas Jefferson's family? He's white. And the story that we were told was, oh, he loved, one of his slaves, and yeah. And this is St. Louis, so this is Hazelwood School District. I was going to, Lawson. For those of you who don't know where that's up there, that's near Florissant. It's if you want to throw a rock, you can even hit Ferguson. But yeah, that's what we were being taught over there in St. Louis when I was in elementary school, and we were taught that only to find out later on in 7th grade, going to school here, that wasn't really the case, but they still gloss over the fact that Thomas Jefferson was essentially raping his slaves, and that is why they're black descendants. They're not something that was consensual. It's not something that was remotely consensual in any kind of standards. There's an entire family of Thomas Jefferson that is just from him raping slaves, and
the Hemmingses. Yeah. And
they don't ever want to talk about that. Even in the college level conversations, if I bring it up and we're talking about racial justice, they want to bring that up. They want to bring up comfort girls. They want to bring up buck breaking. They don't want to bring up all these disturbing subjects.
Did you? So I go hard on this topic in my U.S. History 1 class. Did you watch Hamilton on Disney Plus?
Is that the new one?
Yeah, the musical.
I watched a little bit last night. I was just kind of this is all, it's shiny and glossy. I don't like that.
Yeah, I didn't like it either. And just like the Gettysburg thing, I'm I just thought that they kind of cheapened it. They made Sally's character look like basically a Playboy bunny. I felt like. I mean, and I don't know. It didn't feel right. Like I liked the diverse casting. I thought that was great and excellent. But I also thought that that is a topic we don't need to joke about. We don't need to make, because but maybe that's, it's like, so I've thought about it several times. Does that like reinforce a negative stereotype? I do too. I haven't talked to a lot of people about it though.
No,
right?
I would argue with another problem of this society, which is rape culture. The patriarchal concepts of it. When you're normalizing our forefathers when they were doing heinous acts and making it seem like, oh, it's a part of the glorious revolution, like you're definitely putting the wrong narration in people's minds on what happened. You're not telling the actual whole truth. Again, if there's no consent, there's no consent.
Well, and how can the big question for me is, how could there ever be consent
There can't.
when you're property?
When someone has power over you, you cannot consent to whatever action. You cannot give it. They've taken that from you.
And I wonder if, like, where we are on the Me Too movement, within that, if we're going to reinterpret things like this. Because, one thing I will say that I heard hung up back on the Sally Hemings thing, hung up the narrative, because they did the DNA test in 98, right? But the issue wasn't settled until like 2014 or something, like years after, to where it's like the Jefferson Foundation was like, we believe this. But come to find out, there was all of these broodings on inheritance. Like, well, one thing I've heard in the narrative pretty significantly is like, hey, family members of people who we enslaved who are still alive should get reparations. With something like what is done with Native Americans, like, what do you think about that narrative?
That's a hard one.
I just seen it out there, and I'm like,
yeah. So I've actually not touched the reparations argument because it is so difficult to grasp in the first place. Do I think there should be reparations in the future? Absolutely. But then it comes in the question, how or what form would it take? I would argue, untaxed land for 20 years.
Ooh, that's a great,
tied up,
like rebates, yeah.
Yeah, untaxed land that, would actually do a lot for people. What people don't realize is, black folks, they were economically discouraged, and they were even federally prohibited from owning houses or from owning land, during the 40s or 50s or 60s. And this is what's contributed to this huge wealth inequality today. And that's still the problem that, our community is already reeling from. One way to kind of offset that would be, land redistribution. That's something I've always kind of looked forward to. Money is great, but let me be honest, we can't keep printing money forever.
Yeah, the value of the dollar. I've been paranoid about that for some time. Just, a book I listened to this year, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
It got me paranoid about that. And I keep seeing memes about it. It's like, we want to, I saw one day, it's like, we want $1,000 a month. And it's like behind that curtain, it was like the diminishing value of the dollar. It was like this meme that's basically like the dollar is not worth what it once was.
It's not. I mean, that's a whole thing about, the economy. It's going to plummet no matter what, with everything that's going on today. It was written in the stone, and I think a lot of people are just kind of trying to fool themselves, trying to believe like it's somehow going to magically get better. The dollar, it's been on its way out for a while, and this is a whole argument on currency. I don't want to.
Yeah, I know. How did we get on currency?
Well, no, we got on currency because we're talking about we're talking about reparations,
property, yeah.
and property is going to be one of those big things that would help, particularly not just any kind of property, but property that is also untaxed for a limited amount of time.
There's somebody sitting it right where you were, and we weren't even recording, but I got to get this guy on the podcast because he's a genius. He speaks like 4 languages, and he was like, land ownership's kind of a myth. It's like, try not paying your property taxes for 1 year and see where that land goes, and that is a very valid point. And I was actually looking up states that don't charge income tax or taxes on wages. I did not even know that existed.
Yeah, it does.
I was just like, man, Cora and I here with our little operation we got set up with my little side story of the podcast, and we generate a lot of income, but damn it, the taxes, bro. Like it's insanity. And I was there like for a while before most of the rest of my faith was eroded in the government handling big problems. I was like, I would pay a little more taxes to make some of these problems go away. But then I realized like I'm supposed to pay 38% at maximum. Well, I realized that I technically paid more than that due to all of the use tax, all of the stuff within our state, and everything. I paid about 50% of my income from this business that we generated gross. Jesus. And I'm just like, how did we, and this isn't overgeneralization, but how did we fight a damn revolution over taxation? And then here I am smack dab getting docked 50% of my American dream, my like self-made. Like I don't come from family money or anything. Climb my way up. I'm 33 years old. Climb. Mm-hmm. And like then I arrive and like we recently got pushed out of our neighborhood of our other building we owned. Luckily we bought this one. They wouldn't let us build. They wouldn't let us add on. Right? And it's just like, okay, I get it. I'm not in your club.
Yeah, and I always joke about the Russellville cabal because it kind of seems like there's a whole private club of old money that's just trying to keep, I guess, anybody else from competing against them. But it is a good question about the taxes as well because, you know, for me, I'm not even allowed to really kind of turn Ozark Hate Watch into a full, you know, incorporated organization. Just because the taxes alone would bury us in the first year.
Yeah. What about some like, okay, so here at the gym we have a non-profit boxing club, right? Yeah. So we offer free classes. You can't do any sort of a non-profit organization?
Because of what we're doing and the way we're doing it, no. We cannot have a non-profit. The closest thing I looked at was like sole proprietorship, but even then the taxes.
Yeah, I know. I was a sole proprietor when I got going. Like a sole proprietor, DBA, then sole proprietor, then LLC. Yeah. Type S.
That is what we were looking at, and for right now, it's better just not to be incorporated for a whole slew of reasons. But the taxes, you know, they do catch up. Like for example, last month I spent about $2,000 just driving.
Yeah.
Chewing up that much gasoline, maintenance on the vehicle. So $2,000 just gone.
Are you, if you don't mind me asking, are you like monetized on Facebook or anything like that yet?
We've started mainly, so we're starting to sell merchandise, you know. It's actually on my truck. We have one that says Clan Live Splatter.
I saw that, guys.
Yeah, funny. And then of course we have the Clan Busters logo and.
Okay, let's sidebar. So I'm in this group, which used to be called Unrig Russellville. I liked it a lot more back then. Now it's called Advanced Russellville. Mm-hmm. But you posted in there, you're like a meme, right?
So it was Racists Aren't Safe in the Dirty South.
Which I was like, hell yeah.
It features a crocodile who has a Klansman in full regalia in its head, and obviously he's dead, and the crocodile's about to chow down on him.
I was like, hey, we got one of those at Bonadilla.
Yeah, and actually that was so the whole thing about the crocodile is you've heard the term "fuck around and find out." So it's actually on a flag, and it's a red background with a black crocodile. So the crocodile is slowly becoming the symbol of the anti-racist left, just very slowly, and that's kind of why we were like, "Hey, this is perfect."
Yeah. Well, okay, but that post got taken down and then put back up. Like, what was all that?
Oh God. Okay, so just like with the Clan Live Splatter, just like with Ozark Hate Watch, just like with even that post, unfortunately, people are taking it as threats. I've had the police contact me about my Facebook post of Clan Live Splatter, and what was said to me at that time was the post of Racists Aren't Safe in the Dirty South. It seems like a legitimate threat. So I can understand from a constitutional standpoint white supremacists and racists have the same legal rights as us. But it's like, really?
Well, there's been all this talk. So like my history professor who wrote the Arkansas history textbook, he was given a lecture on Reconstruction era, and he got to the point where he was going to start talking about the when the first surge of the Klan, and he's like, well, a terrorist organization, that's the only thing you can say to describe it. The fact that we haven't taken a stance on that, like I get what you just said with the constitutional argument, but we have taken a very hard stance on other groups, like especially the talk of it as of recently, in recent weeks. I just like, it is a terrorist organization. Yeah. It's if we were, I don't know, I think society would be better if we would take a stand on that issue.
Well, so my understanding was it was kind of declared a terrorist organization like 1875, and then somebody repealed it.
I could see that.
So, and it probably was Woodrow Wilson, come to think of it, because he was a whole Klan fanatic. A lot of people don't know that.
Well, yeah, they showed
Birth of a Nation at the White House.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
Greatest film ever. Jesus. So, no, but no, the post was interpreted as threatening, and all of us kind of scoffed at Ozarks Hate Watch. We were just like, really, this is threatening.
Well, okay, so have you seen similar posts with these groups that you monitor and talk about and follow? Like, what kind of, are they getting contacted by the police? What kind of posts are they making that are the same?
So they had a lot of favorite posts, which was All Lives Splatter. And that was one aimed at protesters, and it showed a bunch of protesters getting knocked over by cars. They have tried targeting our businesses, naming us out there, claiming they're going to come shoot us, they're going to come bomb us out. In Springfield, Missouri, a bomb went off at an activist house. In Branson, Missouri, we had a girl who's being threatened by the Confederate Kathy, or KKK Kathy, whatever they call her now.
Is that like a Karen, or?
She was the one at the Branson-Dixie Outfitters who was screaming, "I will teach my children to hate you."
Yes.
So she was at her house the entire time. Her house was near a Black Lives Matter organizer who was a child and still is a child. And she was threatening the child, and then she sent family members over to come threaten the child and the family. So, we had to go up there and we had to go protect them and what have you. And that's another reason why we keep the cameras and everything. That way folks can see what we're actually doing. And they're always posting things every day about how they can't wait to shoot us. They can't wait for one of us to F up. As soon as we come down their roads, they're going to open fire, things like that. And, I was talking with Branson PD yesterday. They said they do look into stuff like that. But it's also like, well, here in Russellville, I know for a fact they don't. Russellville Police Department has never, ever actually cared to kind of stop or quell racism or rogue Confederatism, folks who actually want to go out there and hurt folks. Mm-hmm. They never cared because their thing is, it's on social media. It's not real. I'm like, okay, it's not real until it is. And
were you around at all when the protest took place that first day, when there's all the people that showed up with AKs because they were worried about the Antifa busloads of...
No, and it sounds like the same treatment. I think I was in Harrison that day, and that was when I was in Harrison carrying the shotgun, leading the march. But no, we had the same treatment up there. They were all afraid of it, and they kept trying to walk over to me, and they kept trying to, come talk with me, and the police just kept telling them no, and I'm like, fine, just let them come talk. And they were just like, well, you guys better not come in here and destroy the town. I looked at him, I'm like, would we be showing our faces?
It's not what it's about. Like, I am fairly convinced, based off my research, that the whole busload of Antifa protesters bullshit is actually white supremacist propaganda.
It is, actually. It's coming from places like here locally, Shield Wall Network, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, several different sort of white supremacist groups. They're usually right-wing militia types. Mm-hmm. They're sharing this in local groups. Like one of the groups we monitor constantly is the Harrison Daily Gossip Common. Because
I have seen posts about that.
Yeah, even the last 24 hours, 70% of the posts were anti-black or anti-BML posts in that group. And that's what they're doing. They're kind of bombing these local populations with all this misinformation or fear-mongering, which is causing them to legitimately react out of fear against a possible Black Lives Matter protest in Arkansas.
You ever heard of a guy named Daryl Davis?
Yes.
Right? Like, I haven't read his book, but he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I watch that shit religiously. But, dude, he posed this question. Like, I'm sitting here just thinking it, like, we're getting along splendidly. We've never met. Mm-hmm. Right? But he raises this question over and over again in other talks I've heard him give. And how does it make you feel with this? How these people hate you, but they've never met you? Yeah. Like,
they can't wait to beat the shit out of me. Like, it's like they never met me.
Let's say like, well, you don't have a Facebook page. You don't have any of that going on. Mm-hmm. Or let's just say the people that don't even know about that, right? Yeah. They come in contact with you at a peaceful protest or whatever. They don't know you. And they hate you. Like that, like just putting it in those simple terms, because he was saying he got a rock thrown at him in '68 in a Boy Scout parade. And he's like, and I just could not my little boy brain, like, it was like, why, gosh, I've never met these people. Like, oh, why are they throwing these? Like, whoa, why do you call me that? Like, and then that's another thing that really is the most, but one of the most empathizing things I've heard is like, I mean, I will have similar talks with my kids, but never like talks that people of color have with their families.
Oh yeah.
Like that, like somebody broke that down for me, and I was just like, because you think like my wife and I are family planning big time right now, trying to conceive, and I think about the world my kid will grow up in all the time, and I think about that in contrast, and I'm like, but then I'm like, well, how do I explain to them this other thing? Like, I can't understand this. Like, I've all of this is an effort to try and understand what that guy, the question Daryl Davis is posing, like. My history mentor is like, I wrote 2 books trying to understand racism, and then I have this guy that I know that not too long ago, older guy, 70s, told me he believed it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I'm talking like somebody I have some respect for, and like it fucked with me for days.
Oh no, that was what made me start Ozarks Hate Watch. Back then it wasn't called that. You know, it's gone through several different name changes. We finally settled on Ozarks because that's the region we all represent, you know, from Hot Springs all the way up to St. Louis and all the way to Tulsa. Mm-hmm. You know, that's where we're pretty much keeping an eye on folks with. But here in Russellville, I used to get told that all the time. They're like, you know, Quinn, racism isn't real. What you're experiencing isn't racism. If you just did this, they like you a lot more. They do this and the other more. And, you know, for the first bit, I kind of believed it because you hear it over and over and over. It sounds reasonable and plausible. But as time went on, and when I actually got to go to other places in Arkansas, or I got to actually leave Arkansas, I realized no, people here are just, they are aggravatingly racist for no reasons. They're prejudicial. They are extremely bigoted. And they teach their children to behave that way. Mm-hmm. And then when you call their children out on it, well, that's just the way the South is. It's like, no,
we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, we don't. It's not the 1950s.
If you don't mind me asking, how old were you when the first time somebody hurled a racial slur at you? Do you remember the first incident?
No.
I tell people this, like, one of the first jokes I ever remember being told was a racist O.J. Simpson joke.
That's just the thing. The question you're asking me makes sense. It's just, I didn't really understand racism until I got older.
Yeah.
So it's hard to even look back and wonder, was that racially charged? You know, what do they mean by that? I do remember when I was younger, when I was like, you know, 5, 6, 7, you know, playing outside with kids. Parents of white kids did not want me playing with them ever in St. Louis. They didn't like it.
Is that where you grew up, St. Louis?
Yeah, North County. Okay. So Hazelwood, Florissant, Ferguson, Pagedale. Yeah. So that's where I grew up, and I remember they did not want us playing together a lot of the times. And it was weird. And, you know, because you'd meet also other kids, they'd be exactly the same, but their parents wouldn't say those same things. They wouldn't care. So, of course, that was when I first noticed it, I think. But the first time someone ever called me the N-word, I mean, it could have been first grade in class for all I remember. Yeah. I know they definitely called me in second, third, and I never got it. You know, I never got through a school year without hearing at least 1 or 2 racial epithets thrown at me.
Was it like, did this happen? Like, people get somebody that's your friend or whatever, you get in an argument with them and then they drop it?
It was worse than that. It would be like, we're sitting around playing and we're trying to figure out, like, you know, what kind of person it is. And some kid would be like, well, my daddy says that you're a Negra. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And of course, you know, when you're that young, you go to your parents to ask them the first question. So, you know, I do remember going to my mom and asking her, what is the N-word? And I remember getting backhanded so quickly by my mother. But, you know, I never got a chance to explain to her, hey, I heard that at school and someone was calling me that. You know, she thought I was just trying to be offensive towards her. And I was about 7 or 8 the first time that happened. And that's when I realized, oh, God, this is something weird. Like, this is something... It's strange when you're that young.
And, yeah, well, I mean, shit, how do we... Like what I was saying a second ago, like how... I don't even have to deal with the issues your mom would have been presented with, but how do we explain these to your kid, if you have kids, if I have kids, like how do we explain this shit to them?
I mean, that is kind of something like we've been wrestling with at Ozarks Hate Watch, because we're trying to come out with some educational videos, and it's like whenever it comes to the kids, you know, it's a hard one. How do you explain to a kid that another kid was raised in such an environment that he may not accept you as a human being and may treat you differently for that, and that is his constitutional right to be that way? And it's just like, oh God, like it is a quagmire, and I've not figured it out yet.
Yeah. Well, you know, healthy conversations about it will move us further, is my hope. Oh, yeah. You know, it's just like I'm always trying to consume. It's funny on my Audible, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks. There's like books you might like, but it's like anti-racist education or something. It's like some sort of anti-racially charged sort of topic heading. And I was like, because I have read a few books on segregation, Jim Crow as of late. And so I was like, well, yeah, let me scroll through here and see what else I need to learn. But, you know, I will say one book that just blew my mind is, and I want to have this historian on the podcast. Her name is Heather Cox Richardson. She wrote a book called How the South Won the War. Mm-hmm. And she goes into all the ways that it got to be like what we're talking about
today
historically. You know, like she starts before the Civil War, but she talks about how these ideas of the Confederacy spread north or manifested in the North. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, all of the states post-Civil War moving westward, how the Confederacy was very invested in being sure that, well, okay, those areas are ideologically up for grabs. We need to ensure that we implant systemic racism over here. Mm-hmm. And de facto racism, de facto segregation over here in the North, right? So she kind of breaks it down, and I'm like, damn. Like that is, it blew my mind how she went into it.
What's even more disturbing is, you know, just kind of surmising from what you're describing in the book, racists read those kind of manuals, if you might say, or they pass them down throughout their ideology, and they still rely on them often today for their tactics. You know, some of them want to bring back segregation. Some of them want to continue to kind of push people ideologically from right-wing and conservative into far right and white supremacist. And, you know, that's something they're still working on to this day, especially here locally. They want to radicalize people into that.
I've heard chatter of that recently, and of basically this idea, not like what you're talking about with land redistribution or anything, but basically, hey, just carve out a state for us.
God. Like, so yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
What are your thoughts on that?
So this was from the leader of the Not Fucking Around Coalition, and they were the group of about 1,000 strong African-American folks that marched on Stone Mountain despite all the threats and what have you. So he made a comment like a week later saying, give us the state of Texas and we'll call it even. Now, I'm almost 90% sure this might have actually just been a really bad inside joke.
That's kind of what I was thinking, honestly.
Because,
like, I wasn't like... Yeah. But, here's the thing, though. Like, what made me bring that up is we've tried something like that. Monrovia, what was that called? It started Liberia.
Yeah.
In the capital was Monrovia because of Monroe. He got it set up. Yeah. But it's like, that just seems like a horrible idea. Like, it's like... That's like segregation, right? Like
it is segregation, and you know that's something that we're actually kind of reeling with right now at Ozarks Hate Watch. Is we're seeing there's a rise of black nationalism, and it's in response to the last 3 years of the rise of white nationalism. And I've actually met activists who said they are pro-segregation, and I'm like, what in the world? Our parents, our grandparents, they really fought to not live in a society like that, and now you're telling me that this is what you want. I mean, there's so much I can explain on that point of view. It is disturbing.
I will say, like, I've never heard anything positive about segregation except for this one story I was reading about this barber who made it big because it was a big black community, and he cut everyone's hair. Mm-hmm. So he was able to achieve an economic status. But it's like, well, why can't he just cut everybody's hair for real, not just people of color's hair? But it's like, that's like the only silver lining in all my research ever. Like, hey, yes, some people really did climb an economic ladder. But it's like, yeah, but most people
were subjugated
in sharecropping like one of the number of different things, not just water. You go into that, water fountains, bathrooms.
It's like one of the things I tell a lot of different activists who are a part of my community, I warn them about the dangers of falling for black nationalist segregational propaganda. The biggest thing is, let's just imagine that segregation actually went quote unquote right. Well, now you're denying people their ability to actually live a free and happy life. And what kind of guarantees do you think it's going to bring you? And I've had some segregationists tell me, oh, well, we'll have our own communities, our own money, our own this, our own that. And I'm like, what happened to the communities that did exist under the time of segregation? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, what happened to Greenwood, Oklahoma, also known as, Black Wall Street of Oklahoma, outside of Tulsa? And I'm like, and what happened to these prominent towns and those prominent towns? What happened to all of that? And
if I'm not mistaken, a very big district was where 630 goes through in Little Rock, right?
Yep. That was also another prominent black area. What ended up happening was, in a segregated government, the majority, whoever held hegemony, still held the most power. So as I told a segregationalist, you're not going to have a lot of power. You'd be strictly defined on a racial basis on what you can and cannot do. And then, worse off, the criminal system will be right back to being further stacked against you. You have no way to protect your enterprise. You have no way to do this and the other. I'm like, segregation's not the way to fix the racial issues in America. It's just going to make them tenfold worse.
Yeah, that was my worry. Like when I started hearing that, I was like, well, we tried this and it didn't work. We tried sending people back to Africa, right? And then there was segregation in the United States. I was just like, oh, this is such a bad idea.
Well, no. I mean, also another thing people don't realize is that black folks are Americans. Black is a uniquely American phenomenon. That's why I prefer to be called black over African American, because
I almost have brought that up because in my Arkansas history textbook, somebody said this other day. I was like, well, in my history book it says blacks a lot. No. So I kind of, I've wondered.
Blacks is offensive. I always say black folks, black community, the black mindset. Sort of in certain situations, the black community is not a monolith, but there'll be those times, like if you ask any black person, did OJ do it? They're going to scream, yes, he did. You see, it's just one of those cultural things. Sometimes it does happen, but for me, it's about the black community. It's black folks. It's black trans lives. It's things of that sort of nature. Blacks is a great way to get your teeth knocked out.
Well, I was talking with a psychology professor friend of mine, and he's like, well, African Americans doesn't even do it anymore. If you want to be real about it, because we have there's so much diversity in the United States in terms of, if you just look at, so I just say a lot of times people of color. Yeah. I don't know if that's, even go ahead.
People of color is more acceptable, but lately the usage is kind of overused because
I see that.
It's kind of erasing folks saying black because folks are uncomfortable, and this is one of the things. If you have someone who is black and they're a friend and you feel comfortable enough to have the conversation and they're willing to have the conversation with you, just ask them, where do I stop my own perpetuation of white supremacy? How do I do that? How do we do that locally? How do we do that in personal day-to-day life? How do we do it socially? How do we even do it romantically? Because believe me, there's a lot of guys out here, they say some things that are just super off color, and I'm just like, oh my God, dude, shut up. Like, this was probably not some of the great part to go about. Really, though, you can't call black American folks African Americans because, there's so many things that's just wrong with that term. I've met actual African Americans, people who've immigrated from, Africa here to the United States. Yeah. And they just look at me and they're like, no, dude, you're not African at all. You're black. Like, that is what they interpret it as. They're like, your ancestors may have been from Africa, but you've been in America for so long. You're culturally completely different.
That is a very unique culture. I should just make time for it, and I'm sure there's fees or whatever, but Harvard University is offering a free course for anybody that wants to take it in African American history. But I guess that's the term they've used for the course or whatever. But it is basically, as I understand it, what was the first year that we had slaves imported to the East Coast? So it's like it's a 400-year span that it covers, right? But I can't remember. It starts with the first imported African slaves, 1609. I knew it wasn't 1607 because that's Jamestown. I was like, if it's not 1612, that's something else. Like I was reaching in my head, dude. I got a lot of dates in there.
No, I'm pretty sure it's 1609.
Yeah, but so 1609 through the Civil Rights Movement is what it covers apparently. But Dr. James Moses over at Tech, he's offered a similar course a few times, and that and History of Christianity are two courses I would like to take for my own selfish reasons. Like I wouldn't describe myself as a Christian. I played one of those guitars in the church band over there, right? But it's just, I teach about history of Christianity more than anything in my Civ 1 class, right? 5,000 years into the narrative, might I add. But anyway, but those would be two great courses. Man, there's like all of Jordan Peterson's lectures are available. Like all of these, and we have access to so much information. It's a weird time to be in education, but also good because I give all my students access to this stuff. I got a great Sally Hemmings documentary that I show that's on YouTube, right? And it interviews several people from the Hemmings side of the family, right? It goes into great primary sources. I show it to my students, and I have them like a questionnaire here, like, was this rape? How does this make you feel? All right, she was 14. Just like all of these little things I make them fill out, and it gets them thinking about it, right? So everything you just said a second ago, like, how do we move forward? How can we fix some of these things? How can people benefit from this conversation you and I are having?
Well, so that is the difficult one, man, because this is a whole thing that I'm wrestling with right now in my head, but I'm going to see if I can try to get it out there eloquently. The biggest problem with America moving away from its racial history is America tries everything to bury its racial history. Not the parts that make people uncomfortable, like Confederate statues and, racist flags, but they actually bury the whole totality of how significantly harmful, that 243 years of racial history was before 99 years of segregation. And people have to realize, really, all of the really big significant issues only ended like 2 generations ago. I'm on the 3rd generation, and we're still dealing with fading echoes of basically 300 years of this racial history. So the conversation first has to be opened, and people actually have to look at America's past. They have to reconcile it. People have to reconcile the harm that was done to the indigenous populations here through genocide, through breaking treaties, through forcing people on treks that killed hundreds of thousands, the millions who were killed, even just the first contact, even when the British were handing out smallpox blankets. People have to start looking at America's history not as what you're taught in school, the Glorious Revolution, the Manifest Destiny, the Star-Spangled Banner being written during the War of 1812. We need to strip all of that out, and we need to start telling people the cold, hard facts, the things that are uncomfortable, but the things that are going to make people think.
One question I've got a lot as a historian is when and in what age do we start educating, right? Because it seems to be this weird bottlenecking funnel or setup where it's like, we're going to give you a little bit in elementary and junior high. We're going to start to open it up a little more. High school, we're going to do
I think that's the problem. When you're in elementary, you're told the world is sunshine and flowers. And then you move throughout, the education system, and you finally become an adult, and you realize it's not that way. I think we're setting up our students for failure just by not being truthful with them. People say, well, what kind of 6-year-old would ever want to have this on their mind? And I just respond back to them, well, if you were black, and if you were 6, and if you were sitting on a trolley and you were near a white girl, this would be something that would be going through your mind. We forget, we're trying to coddle our kids in like this false sense of safety, this false illusion of safety. That doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist even in education. You have to tell them the things that are going to make them uncomfortable, or ask them the questions that are going to be hard and difficult. If people would stop trying to circumnavigate these questions, we wouldn't have these issues later on down the line.
That's a great point, man. Like education does seem to be the answer. As mentioned, I was talking with a family member the other day, and I was saying a lot of the same. I was going off on the lost cause, all this stuff. And I was like, well, you know that these statues went up during the civil rights movement and after Jim Crow, and he didn't know any of that.
Yeah,
and he was like, well, this, you know, he's like, and we didn't argue at all. It was a very back and forth dialogue because he didn't know anything I was saying, and I could tell talking with him. He was like, oh man, really? Like, no, I did not know that. Like, what do you mean? Like, and I'm like, yes, okay, let's go into this a little further. Like, Lost Cosmos starts here. Let's just talk about our state. Like, going in through all these facts, and it's just things that people, they don't know. Like, mind of a child buying Confederate propaganda.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you raise a child and keep a person in a childlike sort of illusion or delusion even, when they become an adult and they get out in the real world, the first thing they're going to do is scream, this isn't real, or this isn't true, or this is false. You know, and I think that's part of the tactic, sadly, is to keep people undereducated so they don't wake up and go, oh, good God, why is this thing even being funded by my tax dollars? You know.
That's a great point.
Because if people, you know, and I think this is why right-wingers don't want any more education in the United States. They kind of want to, like, regress the progressive education.
Especially on, like, people in my field, arts and humanities, like liberal fine arts education. Yeah. Everybody that I'm talking with is super worried, like, that we're going to get defunded.
Oh, yeah. And you know, there's definitely a call for that. And this is definitely a white nationalist sort of game plan, is if you can get rid of the civil arts and liberties, well, what's to stand in your way at that point? What's the challenge?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's what's weird to me is even like my dad thinks, who did not go to college, he thinks it is some sort of like liberal conspiracy where like my professor who trains at this gym and is going to get a black belt and stands for like, I mean, I told you he wrote 2 books on racism. He's written 2 books on racism and trying to grapple with the problem, understand it, and how it is permeated in our political culture. And it's like, now that was my teacher. So, you know, what are you talking about? There's this weird conspiracy among these right-wingers that like, and I've heard you say some funny liberal jokes, but it's like, I just get lumped in with like, yeah, you got brainwashed at college, now you're communist. It's like the third Red Scare around here, man.
Well, yeah, people ask me that all the time. They're like, have you been to college? I said no. And they're like, oh, really? So what do you think about Black Lives Matter vandalizing things? I'm like, I don't condone that. And then they're like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I start telling them things left and right. They were just kind of looking at me like, you don't seem like a problem at all. You don't seem bad. And I'm like, yeah, don't listen to what you see on social media when you can't figure out where it even came from. You know?
What would you tell people who like... The number of people I run into that think Black Lives Matter is a saying, and that's it, like some sort of saying, and nothing that has that has tenets and agenda attached to it. Like, what would you say to somebody listening to this that has no idea what Black Lives Matter stands for?
Come find me. You can hang out with me, and I'll show you exactly what we're talking about. You know, this is not something that can be defined because we're talking about a cultural issue here. You know, it's like people ask me, why do I demonstrate 2A, for example? Why do I always carry an assault rifle or a shotgun on my shoulder? And I say, well, a lot of folks who were African-American or black were exercising their 2A rights, and they were doing so in a legal manner, and then they still end up dying in a police interaction. And the police were citing because they had a firearm, because they had a weapon on them. And then the question comes from even like white moderates and liberals, well, why do black people need guns? And I get thrown that question at each and every protest. You know, they're like, why do you think you need a gun? And I'm just like, you know, in my line of work and what I do, I actually know what all the threats are out there. I know what is said out there. To walk out here without a gun would be the equivalent of walking out of your house without any pants on.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, I mean, you growing up in the local, like, I grew up hunting. I have guns myself, got a shotgun next to the bed.
I mean, I'm the son of 2 Army veterans, so.
Yeah. Did you have any grandparents or anything that served in the war? World War II or anything like that?
No, they were actually alive during the 60s, and they end up getting to narrowly not have to go to Vietnam, just narrowly.
Great, because they sent more.
Yep.
There was not proportionally racial disproportionation in the number of people they were sending over that were black people, right? So
yeah,
I did a podcast with a guy about his Ohio historian, and he hit on that, and he's writing a book about it. He did a way better job of explaining. I should go back and listen to it.
No, I mean, it falls into those list of categories, like why the racial divide is so bad today, and it's those actions that were done during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, where a lot of Americans saw the boon. You know, it was all sorts of different ways to kind of coerce African Americans into this channel of despair or poverty or criminality. You know, I mean, what's really disturbing to me today is, for example, I was living in St. Louis. I can go to Illinois. And Illinois is a free recreational state. So long as you're not doing anything stupid, they don't care. But then realizing back in Missouri, there's still someone who is sitting there in prison for 15, 20 years because he had $28 worth of weed.
Jeez, I got more than that in the studio right now. Like, you know what I'm saying? I got a card for it, but damn.
You know, those are still lingering effects that are still happening today from white supremacy from 20, 30, 40 years ago.
That's one thing that really, truly blows my mind. Yeah. But not just with weed, other things too, but it's like, I can't remember who was making this point that, it was Joe Rogan. He's like sitting there like we are, like smoking a doob, like having a grand old time. And he's like, somebody is serving a prison sentence for like years more, and they got popped for like a little bit, like what you're saying, and I'm sitting here legally consuming it, have been for years, because in California he has been like, well, I can't even remember how long it's been legal now. It's been so long.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like even here in Arkansas, I think still if you're caught with like any amount of it, it's an automatic felony, and it's up to 3 years in prison. It usually does not happen because of Act 309, if I'm correct, Act 309 or Act 310. Basically, it kicks it down to a misdemeanor under a certain amount. But it's also like, we're still charging people with felonies for marijuana? And, you know, if we're going to look at the impact and sort of the destructive nature of the way people behave when they're under the influence, you know, I will admit what potheads do to the Walmart aisle at the Supercenter, you know, to the bags and chips and sodas, that should be a felony. Especially around 420.
Okay, give me some Funyuns, man. One of those frozen pizzas.
Yeah, so that we can criminalize. No,
that's hilarious.
But, you know, it's like I've always asked this question. Why is it acceptable for me, for example? You know, I used to operate heavy machinery. I've done a whole bunch of different stuff in like the industrial production world. Why is it okay for me to come in with a hangover?
Oh, for real, man.
Why is it okay with me to come in with a hangover, but God forbid I smoke a plant on my off time?
You know, I got my blood drawn this morning, and I was talking with my doctor, and for the first time ever, I was like, she's going over with me. She's like, so you don't smoke, you don't drink? I was like, no, but I do consume cannabis. And I was like, I've never even told a doctor that. And she's like, oh, well, no big deal. We need to kind of update this form to reflect, because she said that a growing number of people are super afraid to say yes to that question, period, or smoking.
And, you know, people have actually died that way because, like, whenever you have to deal with an anesthesiologist, the chemistry involved, if they're not aware of that, they may give you a drug that will have a negative counteraction with it and will put you into a coma.
Yeah, you know, that's...
And then also, you know that if... you admit to consuming a federally illegal substance, they will not authorize you for a transplant, an organ transplant.
Damn.
Ever in your life.
Shit. Let's move to Canada.
Yeah, no kidding.
You know, that's another thing. Like, I've had 2 guests from Canada on the podcast recently. And one of them had a double kidney transplant, dude. First, he had a 3rd kidney in until they could take... I think they took one out, then the other. They took both of his bad kidneys out at the same time. But he was like, oh, thanks to medicine here in Canada. But, dude, people like in our area that are considered like, that goddamn socialized medicine up in Canada is the reason we can't do that.
I mean, they're screaming about socialized medicine, and then we call St. Mary St. Murders.
Dude, like, if you or I go into the hospital for coronavirus, we're going to be in debt for a long fucking time. Like, that has got to change.
I mean, I hate to say it, my coronavirus plan is, you know, really hope it happens fast, and that's it. Because I've seen the survivors, and I've seen the debilitating effects of it, and that is utterly terrifying. Then, you know, we have a government that's not done anything. You know, it's not done anything short-term, long-term. And
I heard wearing masks are patriotic now. I don't know.
Fuck Donald Trump.
Yeah, is it that funny? He's like, fuck mask. Like, I heard a conspiracy, and I'm not big into conspiracies anymore. I used to be big, but
I mean, it's Russell. That's all you have time for.
Yeah, like, but somebody said that they briefed Trump on this big thing about how the masks were throwing off all the facial recognition software, which he actually liked to hear. This was the conspiracy. So he was like, well, yeah, this will overthrow the deep state that's watching everybody. Like these QAnon, like there's some people I know that like push that stuff my way, and I'm like,
oh, I mean, there was a time where some QAnon BS came from my own mother's mouth. I'm just like, what in the world?
Yeah, I think the Tom Hanks thing is a QAnon. They're trying to think Tom Hanks is like a rapist of kids, and
he's part of the Jeffrey Epstein
shape-shifting reptilian pedophile monster. I don't know, man.
I mean, so I really do think at first people were just on the internet doing let's create a stupid myth.
Ellen, Oprah, there's this whole Jimmy Kimmel, there's this whole big conspiracy, and I don't know if that came from QAnon. But I've had so much chatter about it. I've had to just yesterday, I started looking into some of the videos that are debunking some of the tenets or explaining it, because like the two guys I was following on it are conspiracy debunkers, right? So, but it's just like, this is where you guys got your information, this cryptic ramblings of this alleged intelligence officer.
Oh, I mean, it's crazy. It's like, there's this one Facebook page I used to follow all the time on Facebook. Used to love the content because, it's more left-leaning and what have you. Lo and behold, I look on Facebook the other day. It says Russian-controlled state media.
Damn it.
I'm like, oh my fucking God. Because I've been following this page for like 2-3 years. And I'm like, what? Shit. I was assuming it was an American that was, we were talking about American issues. No, it was Russian propaganda to incite the left. And I'm just like, my God. And that's what I'm warning people about, really, with Ozarks Hate Watch. Do not believe anything you see on the internet. And it's kind of surprising the journalists that they're the first people to believe everything on the internet.
I know, man. I think about that all the time. Like when some people in my professional life will be talking to me about like teaching online and stuff, and I'm like, you were 30 when the internet was invented. Right? Like literally you rejected it all the way until now, and you can't even type.
I know.
Right. And I'm like, but you're sitting here telling me how to teach online. I got it. I'm going to talk to other professors from other institutions and see what they do. Yeah, that's the best bet. But it's, man, navigating right now in that digital space
is
insane.
insane.
And being able to sort of armor yourself with the information to dispel some, or at least to be able to see it and be like, I know that's bullshit. I know where it originated. I know where it came from.
That's one other thing we're working with. You've heard of the tactic where like people will do rapid fire questions at you, and basically the amount of time it will take you to actually debunk all of it, even though you have the information, just the time it would take to explain all of it.
Well, what about Irish slaves?
Yeah,
like that type of shit.
Yeah, apparently
that's going to take me a long time to explain. By the way.
Yeah.
But it's bullshit.
By the time you finish explaining, well, now they have another conspiracy, and then they have another conspiracy, and then they have another conspiracy, another conspiracy. And that's
what about Native American? Yeah, I've got. You comment, well, that in what you're saying may be a little different, but I'll comment on an issue, and then somebody will say, well, what about Native Americans? What, you don't care about them? I was like, just yesterday I made a post about Native Americans.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just kind of weird labor that they're putting on people.
It's the funniest way I've heard described is mental gymnastics.
Yes, it is
big time
gymnastics. And, that is something I'm seeing more and more of on the internet. And it's hard to comprehend how we even got here. When did we start taking it so seriously? Yeah.
Man, so what are your goals for the future here? Like, you keep fighting the fight you're fighting, I'm sure, but where does
Ozarks Hate Watch end?
Post-election and stuff like that. Are things going to change for you?
I don't want to think about that.
I know, right? For real.
This is going to be the part of the podcast. I've already told some people what my thoughts and feelings are. Donald Trump's going to win.
I'm people could say what they want. I'm fearful of that as well.
I'm terrified.
The biggest thing I've heard someone say about him that is the truest statement is most American presidents we've had have tried to bring the country together, even if they're just saying it, even if they have no plan, they're trying to unify. He is not doing that. The division that we have right now, and I just cannot get into this idea that it's some sort of deep state conspiracy of this new world order Illuminati shit. He's out to get them.
He is doing what Adolf Hitler did, which is called the big lie propaganda tactic, which is make up a lie that is so utterly insane that people could not even fathom it being wrong. And he's doing this with a mixture of different other techniques to kind of manipulate people. I think about going into the election and then post-election, I'm thinking my job is going to go from being hard to being difficult to, even becoming the type of thing that would make me an enemy of the state simply for reporting on white supremacists, on hate groups, for things like that. Because there does seem to be a very, it seems like there's an intention by the administration to quell efforts to stop the rise of white nationalism. Then, of course, because I'm always involved with protests, now we have, unidentified federal goon squads running around American cities, snatching people up.
Yeah.
That's also another thing I think about. I think about the safety of my people with that especially. And I'm just like, how far can I let that go? And how much in harm's way can I really allow them to be put into, even if they volunteer themselves for it? I think about the legal aspects of running Ozarks Hate Watch. We're not the SPLC. We don't have $571 million sitting in a bank somewhere. We're a grassroots sort of organization, and we're relying off donations just to kind of keep us going. Now, there's also the legal bail fund that we have to have set up for ourselves. And
have you been have you been arrested or anything crazy?
No.
Great.
Literally, I have one of the cleanest records out of anybody I've ever worked with, and still, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We'll show up at a protest, and I'm pretty sure, we saw, for example, a woman by the name of Dawn Jeffrey. She was arrested down in Conway for protesting the racial treatment of a minor at a business. And they just called her name out and just went and picked her up and carried her to the car. And it was just like, really? I think we're going to see the actual final rise of fascism in the United States. We've been talking about it. We've been warning people about it. We've been like, hey, this is not right here. And we're actually going to see the political government move from something that was kind of Republican and sort of Democratic into something that's more fascistic as we move forward. I don't know what really is going to happen with the organization, with everybody. My thing is to keep going as long as I can. Because we are getting people, they are talking about the conversation. Well, we have these folks in our community. How do we either bridge the gap to them, or how do we keep them out of particular areas of power, such as, being like a police chief or being a fire chief? So we're constantly trying to figure out what is the best strategy to move forward. But it's definitely some scary times nowadays.
Well, man, like I said, I kind of followed what you're doing. That's how I honestly, you just popping up on my page and friends of mine liking your page, and what you're doing is needed. I would say that you are developing some much needed skills at this time of your life. Yeah. Whether you on down the road want to get into some other avenue where you can make a difference in the same regard, maybe that's lobbying or something. I don't know. But
well, I mean,
podcasting.
So there was a lot of threats of protesters being attacked. I've noticed almost everywhere I've gone, none of it's happened. People see me and they're just like, okay, we're not going to do anything today because he knows that, he knows who we are and he knows how to find us and things like that. And I hate to say it, it's almost like a nuclear deterrent at this point. When people see me, it doesn't matter who. Everybody kind of starts to calm down, just keeps staying within their constitutional boundaries. They don't jump out of them, or they don't try to do anything crazy. But I don't know how long that's going to last, because again, we have people threatening to run us over every other day.
Have you been following what Sean King's dealing with?
Yes.
Holy shit.
He has his own private security, and that's something that we considered maybe even forming a private security group that could protect people. But I remember one of his posts I read the other day where he said government agents were basically stalking his house. Post. They wouldn't identify who they were, but his security team ran them off. And it's just, things are pretty scary. I've been followed. Most of our people who work for us have been followed.
You've been pulled over a lot.
Pulled over. We've had people even stalking our houses. So
where, and you don't have to say this on the podcast, but where are you situated out of right now? Not like, are you mobile? Yeah, you know? Okay.
100%. We're not. Me particularly, because I'm such a target now, I don't really stop and stay in one place for too long, no more than about a week or so.
But your network is
it goes
Missouri, Tulsa, Arkansas,
Rock, Tulsa, St. Louis, Missouri, and then of course anything that's along the 7 corridor. So that's Hot Springs, Russellville, Harrison, and then 65, Branson and Springfield. That's the core of where we're focusing right now.
Yeah.
So,
how long have you been involved with this? Like
2 years now.
2 years.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. This is you're getting forged in the fire, man. Like
Trial by fire.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do remark on that for a reason, because there's no way that this stuff you're engaging in does not have a profound impact on your life.
It does.
And not just like, I know it's got to be stressful and stuff, but I'm thinking about the human you're going to be 20 years from now, and what kind of difference that human will make. You know what I'm saying? Because you are in a forging process. Some people go to college. Some people grassroots organize. Some people, I don't know, they just work in a factory their whole life. But it's like, you're getting some life experience that is invaluable, but
I mean, let me tell you, if somebody had told me at 25 I was going to be able to do a quick maneuver and start following a person who was following me, and that person would be a cop, and I noticed another cop was behind me, and I could recognize stuff like that, and that would become a normal thing, like, I would have told you absolutely not. I'm going to college back then.
If somebody told me I would own the second largest gym in the state at 23, I would have been like, no. But I'm a 3-time college dropout with I just sold cars over here. Like, what are you talking about? But damn it, if it didn't turn out that way in 10 years' time.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, and now I just my main thing I care about the most is this podcast.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, bro, let's go ahead and wrap it up. I've got to make a couple of stops before I come back and teach some classes here this evening. But do you drive through here often?
Yes.
Dude, if you ever are in the neighborhood, like today, I mean, I'm off this summer. I anticipate I'll be teaching online in the fall, even though they're not saying that. But if you ever have anything you want to talk about,
I could always talk.
Yeah, but man, consider this a platform. I support what you're doing. I follow along with what you're doing. So let me know. Let me know if I can have you back on, because this will be great content to share with my audience.
For definite, we can go into deeper subjects like Civil War history, something I definitely want to kind of go over.
Man, we can plan like maybe a podcast that's around a certain topic within that. Like my friend Thurman I was telling you about, he's going off the rails on this stuff right now. It's great.
I mean, I think like one thing, so I've been told the Battle of Pea Ridge, which apparently resulted in mass desertion.
Yes.
Like, that would be an interesting topic, because everybody mentions that in Civil War history in Arkansas.
Yeah, Pea Ridge and Prairie Grove, they were like the beginning and end of a year. And it was the last big year of staged battles, but then the guerrilla warfare after that, man. In this state was the letters I read, I'm just like,
Jesus, yeah.
They talk about from like Huntsville area going towards Fayetteville, like when Sherman went through, right?
Yeah.
They said there was a 50-mile swath that was just burned out.
Yep.
Like
William Sherman in total war.
Yeah. But you hear about that in Georgian places, right? And I just did not know the degree of which, particularly. So that's like Northwest Arkansas during the war was the biggest area of abolitionist sentiment. They wanted to abolish slavery. They didn't want to enter the war. They were pro-union. So, but that guerrilla warfare that took state knew no side, no loyalty, no ideology. It was wild. So, yeah.
We'll definitely talk about it.
Yeah. Well, hey, man. Right on, bro. Appreciate you, dude.
Appreciate
Wrapping it up.
All right. Yeah.